Hey everybody, welcome back to Alfred's Basic Adult Piano Course, Lesson Book Level 1. This video is Lesson 72. We're going to cover pages 82 and 83 in the book today, introducing overlapping pedal and the song Greensleeves. So this is a really important lesson today because we're talking about overlapping pedal. And this is pretty much the most common form of pedal that is associated with using the piano. In fact, 99% of the time, you're pretty much going to be doing this pedal. It's really tricky to learn at first. It's going to take some work, but the good news is once you get it, that's pretty much it for pedaling. Like I said, there's a few other forms of pedal, but you just really don't see them that often. Now, we've learned pedaling already much earlier in the book, but that was just basically going down on the pedal and coming off for a little bit and then going back down. This overlapping pedal, you really won't hear any breaks in the pedaling or the music. It's actually a very fluid, smooth motion. So let's get into it. So I've got my trusty pedal camera down there today. And so, of course, we're talking about using the sustain or the damper pedal, which if you're on a piano, you've got 3 pedals. Typically, it's going to be the one on the far right. Now, no matter how many pedals you have, if you have 2 or if you're on a keyboard and you just have 1, whatever the pedal is on the far right is going to be your sustain or damper pedal. So at the top of page 82, it says the following sign is used to indicate overlapping pedal. So if you look at this like bracket, and you're always going to find this under the bass clef, the line where the bracket begins, that basically means to put your foot down on the pedal. And then as the bracket extends horizontally, you're holding down the pedal. Now it says at this point, pedal again. Now really what you do is it's just an up-down motion. It's pretty quick. So remember when we're pedaling that you don't want to be too close to the piano. You don't want to be too far away so that you slip off, but realize that you're not really going to need to use much action. Now, if you're still learning and you feel like this is all new for you, and you're still a beginner, you might find yourself having to put a little more force into it. But the way the pedal reacts, unless you're on maybe a grand piano that has some really stiff pedaling, most of the time, if you're about here with your foot, probably only covering half of the pedal, you're really not going to have to pedal that much for it to work. You don't really need to go all the way down with such great force. Plus, if you do that, it can be a little noisy, so you don't want that to interfere with your music. Remember to keep your heel planted on the ground. You don't want to lift your heel up at any point. When you're not pedaling, you can either rest on the pedal or just take your foot to the side, using your heel to sort of pivot. You never want to move your foot completely off and back, because when you get back to the pedal, you may end up kicking the piano by accident or just being sloppy altogether. However, in this lesson today, there's not really a big break in the pedaling because overlapping pedal is just continuous pedaling. So most likely, you're just going to be on the pedal the entire time. So at that point, you pedal again. And remember, you're down on the pedal. It's just a quick up and then back down. And then when the bracket comes up, the end of the bracket, you're off altogether. And that's when I said you could either rest on the pedal or just slightly turn your foot to the side. And I explained this on the right there. It says that when your foot's down, as the hand goes down, now this is super important. As the hand goes down, the foot comes up. So I'm just going to use like a C major chord here in my right hand. So did you see what I did? As I'm coming down with my hand, my foot comes up and then immediately back down, and that is basically it. Now, it's easier said than done because typically what happens is, let's say you're pedaling and you're on another chord. I'm just going to play a D major chord here. When I go to C, and I'm going to do this in slow motion, and I sort of lift my hand over, what people do is they're going to lift their foot. That's the tendency. That's the way we're wired. We lift our hands, we lift our foot. But no, as you're switching, you're still down on the pedal, and then when you come down on the C chord, that's when your foot comes up and then right back down. So you're going to want to practice just doing that several times because that's basically the technique. And you can just do a single note if you want. You can just be down on the pedal, so make sure your foot's down, and you can play a C, And I'm going to go to the C sharp because if I don't pedal correctly, it's really going to clash, C to C sharp. But if I pedal correctly, the clash isn't there. Did you hear it? Because I pedaled correctly. So you can practice by, again, having your foot down. You can press the C with really any finger you want. And I would purposely lift my hand more than you actually would because I want you to get in the habit of lifting your hand means not lifting your foot. And that will be a good way to train your brain to not lift your foot when you're lifting your hand and just sort of send out those signals. So I'm lifting my hand, my foot's still down. As I come down on C sharp, right when I touch the key, the surface, and I'm going down, my foot pops up and then right back down. Now you can think of it as a release. In other words, my foot's on the pedal. My foot can't come up. It's stuck. It's stuck. So how do I release my foot? I've got to press the button for the release. And I'm going to press the C sharp here, and boom, it pops my foot up. So I always find that that's a nice little analogy maybe. Think of your next key or note or chord or whatever as sort of a release. You're not going to release your foot before that. And that's the big part of overlapping pedal. That's the part that's so tricky. So we're going to look down the next line. It says, practice the following exercises before playing Greensleeves. So two things are happening here. This is our bass clef for left hand. We're going through most of the chords that we're going to use in Greensleeves, but we're also doing them with overlapping pedal. So when you start a song, most of the time, this won't work in Greensleeves. You can do it for this example. You can already have your foot down. So remember I said earlier, the beginning of the bracket means put your foot down. Now the beginning of the bracket on this little exercise lines up with your chord. So you would assume I'm going to go down with my foot when I play that chord altogether. You can certainly do that. However, because there are no notes or anything before that, you can already have your foot down and then play the chord. So that might be a little bit easier. That won't always work. But that is an option in this case. Already have your foot down rather than trying to time it together. So I'm actually going to have my foot down. So this is an A minor chord in your left hand. So that's 5 on A, 3 on C, and your thumb on E. Make sure you're in the right octave. This is middle C right here. We're in 3/4 time for this exercise. We're also in 3/4 time for Greensleeves. You're going to hold that for 6 counts. So the rule of pedaling typically is when you change a chord, that's when you pedal up and down. So look at my next chord there. On measure 3, it's a G major chord. So I'm going to lift, and I'm going to exaggerate so I practice lifting my hand but not lifting my foot. And when I go down on the G chord, my foot comes up and then right back down. And the reason you want to get it right back down is if I'm playing a piece with a lot of notes, and I'm supposed to be pedaling those notes, and my foot is still up, until I put my foot back down, all those notes I just played are not going to be sustained. So it's a good practice to be right back down so you don't miss anything. Okay? Now in this exercise, it doesn't feel that way, but when you incorporate your right hand, which we will in Greensleeves, which has a lot more notes, you'll notice that. Now after the G chord, our next chord is F major. So there's a little pattern here. And I'm going to go up and back down. The pattern is I'm kind of just walking down the keyboard with these chords. So we had A minor, A, C, E, down to G major, G, B, D, and down to F major, F, A, C. So we're just walking it down. And then finally, E major, there is a G sharp here. So don't be tempted to do E minor. You would think that pattern would continue to E minor. But there's a G sharp right in the middle, and that actually makes it an E major chord. Okay, so once again, A minor, and I'm not so worried about the 6 beats per measure. I really want you guys to focus on just pedaling. So take as much time as you need. And like I said, move your hand to the next chord, the G chord, and then when you're ready, the release. I push down on the chord to release my foot. Same thing for the next chord, the F major. And then lastly, the E major. And so all these chords have the exact same fingering, 5, 3, and 1. So you're pretty much in a locked position. We've talked about that many times. Just keep it nice and relaxed, but locked right there, and you should do fine. Of course, the E major feels a little different because of the G sharp, but it's still with the third finger. Now, the next line, they're just having you do it more quickly. Instead of 6 counts for a chord, it's just 3 counts. All that means is they just want you to get faster at it. Naturally, if you can do it like quarter note speed and do it correctly, you're really in good shape. So now I don't expect you to do it that fast because this pedaling is going to be a little challenging. But the whole point is, to get faster at it, to get better at it before you go into Greensleeves, because even though those chords in Greensleeves are held for 6 beats, you've got all these notes in the right hand to think about. So that busyness in the right hand is going to kind of distract you a little bit from your left hand, but we'll get into that now in just a second. So that wraps up overlapping pedal, and this is a great exercise. So I would definitely do that exercise many, many, many times. But remember the rules. There's not much to it. The most important rule is when you're on a chord and you go to your next chord, don't lift the pedal until you press the keys for that next chord. And again, think of it as a release. I push down, boom, my foot pops up. And then the other rule is it has to come right back down. And those are pretty much the 2 rules for the pedal, specifically overlapping pedal. All right, so let's focus now on Greensleeves. So we're not going to use the pedal for a little bit. We're actually going to save that to the end. So I may have mentioned this in the past, probably with the other pieces that use pedal, but I always like to probably wait and add pedal at the very end. I say probably because once you get more accustomed to the pedal, you might want to use it earlier. You might want to use the pedal before you do things like dynamics and stuff. You may even end up using it right away. Eventually you will, but what I'm going to do for now is save it for the end because it's new, and I want you guys just to focus on things one layer at a time. So we're going to hit the notes first like we typically do on Greensleeves. Let's read here at the beginning. We got a few things going on. Key of A minor. So you may have noticed those chords we played earlier. That was the key of A minor. So we started on an A minor chord, and then we went to G major, F major, E major. And A harmonic minor is technically what we're in. If you remember, an A natural minor scale is A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A. It's just like C major, all white keys from A to A. But harmonic, you raise the 7th. And that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. G is the 7th. If I raise it, it's a G sharp. Aha. That's why E major, because they've elected to do a raised 7th. You won't see that in the key signature. You would just see it written as a G sharp. Does that mean every chord in the, every G in this piece is going to be sharp? No. Actually, it'll go back and forth. You'll see some G naturals and some G sharps, which is pretty typical. So the key of A minor, though, in the key signature means no sharps or flats. So any accidentals, any sharps or flats you see in this piece, they will be written in. We mentioned earlier it's in 3/4 time. You do have a new dynamic sign, which we'll incorporate later. Mezzo piano means moderately soft. So not as soft as, piano, but pretty close to it. Now let's dig in with the notes. So the right hand is the melody. And you're going to take your thumb to A above middle C, and that you'll notice is a pickup note or an incomplete measure. So that is beat 3. Now when we get to counting, we're going to count 1 and 2 and 3 and. We have some dotted quarter notes and eighth notes in this piece. So we're dealing with notes that get half a beat. So we're going to keep that 1 and 2 and 3 and consistent. There's quite a bit of it. So on this piece, I am going to be very consistent about that. When we get into the counting, we're going to focus notes. Now, right off the bat, after this A, you have a C. You would think 3 on C, but no. They need us to go to 2 on C, and that's probably to prepare us for what's to come. Next, you have a D, so that would be your 3rd finger. The next measure, that E is with 4, and there's F sharp, which we need 5. So that's why the 2 went to C earlier. You're going to come back to E, In the next measure, you're going to come back to D. Now remember, we had your 2 on C. Here they say 2 to B. Very important, and that's so you can easily get thumb down to G in our fourth measure. Now, if your thumb's on G, obviously you're going to have to bring 2 over to A, which is the 8th note there, followed by 3 on B. In the last measure, 4 on C, they remind us 2 on A. And then at the top of the page, they reminded us 2 on A, possibly because at the top of the page, we need to go to 3 on A. That's a little tricky. 2 on A, and it sneaks up on us 3 on A. You could do 3 on A earlier, but I would say stick with that 2 on A. It's a little bit easier. So once you get to the top of 83, that's when you'll go to the 3 on A like they have written. So then that puts 2 on a G sharp, which remember, G sharps are the middle, it's the middle black key of any of the 3 black keys. And then you're back to 3 on A. The second measure, you have 4 on B. We're back to G sharp, and that thumb comes down to E in the third measure. Now, this is important. We have a big jump. Don't just go to whatever finger's on A, go to the thumb. You have to do this. And that's because we're going all the way to the F sharp again. So that's why we need our thumb on A, which, by the way, this is just like the beginning. So thumb on A. In the fourth measure, 2 on C, followed by 3 on D. The last measure, 4 on E, and then 5 on the F sharp. Back to E. On the second line, 3 on D. That 2 needs to come over to B. And so in measure 2, we can get our thumb down to G. So all of this is a repeat of the beginning of the piece. Bring 2 to A on the 8th note. You'll have 3 on B. In measure 3, you have 4 on C, followed by 3 on B. Now this is tricky. Don't go to 2 on A. Go to your thumb on A. So it's a squeeze right there. And then in the next measure, you have a crossover. Bring the 3 over to G sharp, followed by 2 on F sharp, back to 3 on G sharp. Remember the rule, it's still the same note. It's still a G, so it's still a G sharp because it's in the same measure. And then all of that fingering helps us easily land on E and A with 1 and 4. And you have E and A again in the last measure, which again will be 1 and 4. Now keep track of that 4 on A. You're going to take that 4 off the A and jump all the way up to G. Big jump right there, and that's the start of our third line. In the second measure, you're still 4 on G, and then you have 3 on F sharp, 2 on E. Now, the third measure, this is new for us, finger substitution. You're going to play the D with your thumb. While holding it, switch to the third finger without playing it again. So what you could do is on beat 1, this is a half note. On beat 1, you play it with the thumb. On beat 2, switch to your third finger, but don't play it. And this allows you to make an adjustment so you can get the next several notes. There was no other way. You could probably do a crossover to that 2 on B. It's not very easy. It's doable, but it's a little clumsy. So this finger substitution is a nice option. So if you have your 3 on D now, the third beat of that measure, you're just going to do 2 on B. It's a little stretch still. Your 2 would comfortably go to C, but you're going to move it to B. And the fourth measure, your thumb comes down to G. So if you have an A right after the G, logically, and you've had this earlier, you got to bring the 2 to A. Followed by 3 on B, and your last measure, 4 on C. Now you got an A. You remember you did it with your second finger. You need to do it with your third finger. This is a repeat of the bottom of page 82. They had the second finger, which is odd. My only guess is they did the second finger there on purpose to prepare you because of the the jump to the top of page 83, maybe that was easier. I'm not sure actually now why they just did 3 here. So that being said, you can either do 2 here at the end of the 3rd line on page 83 and then switch to 3 on the next A, or you can do 3 as they suggest and change the A at the end of page 82 to a 3rd finger. I'm just going to stick with what's written. I know it's different. I like consistency, but I think it's not going to be too confusing for me. But you certainly have options, and if it's confusing, you can do consistency. But I'm going to stick with what's written. On the 4th line, so I'm going to do 3 on A there. 2 on G sharp, back to 3 on A. The 2nd measure, 4 on B, 2 on G sharp, and the 3rd measure, thumb down to E. Now keep track of your 4th finger. Once again, we're jumping up to this high G. And the last measure, you play it again. 3 on F sharp, 2 on E. Now at the bottom line, we have our finger substitution. Thumb on the D, switch to 3 without playing it again. Bring your 2 over to B, and then your thumb in the next measure down to G. 2 over to A, 3 to B. 3rd measure, 4 on C, 3 on B. Squeeze the thumb to A. So this is a repeat also of the 2nd line on this page. We had this before. 3rd finger over to G sharp, 2 on F sharp, back to 3 on G sharp, and then comfortably we should get to 1 and 4 on E and A. And the same thing for the last measure. So the fingering alone is pretty tricky in this piece. You've got some jumps, you've got some stretches, you've got some crossovers. We even have the new finger substitution. So in addition to all the pedaling, which we'll get to again in a little bit, you've got all this fingering that you really haven't had before. The reason for all the fingering, is really to make things very smooth. And really, the fingering could be even more complicated with a lot more crossovers and jumps if we didn't follow what's here. So I like what's here. There is the exception of those 2 A's that they chose different fingering. Again, you can decide what you want, but I'm just going to follow what they have. So you want to spend some time on these notes in the right hand before you do anything else, and you want to get used to that fingering. If the notes are easy, but the fingering is a struggle, I would still keep the right hand practice to itself before even adding that left hand, and certainly before adding the pedal. Now, I would not work with pedaling on just the right hand. You could work pedaling when you do the left hand. And the reason for that is the exercise that we did at the top of page 82, or the middle of 82, because pedaling is usually influenced by the left hand because of all the chord changes, and that's the case. In fact, these chords are pretty much what we had in the exercise on 82. Now, I'm not going to do the pedaling yet. I'm just going to go through these chords again. So at the very beginning, you notice the left hand doesn't come in on the pickup measure. It comes in on beat 1 of technically measure 1, the first full measure. That's our A minor chord. And it's tied, so you're going to hold it for 6 counts over 2 measures. So this is just like the exercise. Next, you have the G chord, again for 6 counts, followed by the F chord for 6 counts, which is tied into the top of page 83, followed by the E major chord for 5 counts, because there's a little rest. Now that little rest is kind of nice there. Notice the pedal will come off of that. You're going to use that rest to help jump back up to A minor, so that's a good time to jump up. And you're going to repeat this pattern for the most part. You've got A minor again for 6 counts. Go down to the 2nd line, G major again for 6 counts. But when you go to F in the 3rd measure, it's only for 3 counts, followed by the E chord for 3 counts. Now what you're going to do here is you're not going to go back up to A minor like it did previously. You're only going up to 2 notes, A and C. Because of that, you just need your 2 on A and your thumb to move over to C. Like that. That's all it is. and you're going to play it again in the next measure. Now, when you get to the third line, this is tricky because this is a chord we hadn't had on the previous page in the warm-up. You're going to go to C major, but it's inverted. So this is actually a second inversion of the C major chord, where G's on the bottom, C's in the middle, and E's on the top. But what I like to look at is where I'm coming from. I'm coming from 2 and 1 on A and C. Now I'm going to move 2 and 1 to C and E. So you can kind of keep it as a locked position. And when you go to the C and E, add your 5 to the G. So looking at it that way would make it a little bit easier to learn. You've got this for 6 counts once again, and then you go to G major. So at this point in the piece, you're sort of substituting, it's sort of substituting A minor for the C major chord. Because after it, like I said, you go to G major for 6 counts. In the last measure, you've got F, that's tied for 6 counts. And then on the next line down, measures 2 and 3, you've got E major for 5 counts because of that rest on measure 3. And instead of jumping up to A minor, you're going to jump up to the C chord again. Now, here, it's different. You're not coming from 1 and 2. You're not even using the second finger. You've got 5, 3, 1. But you still want to keep that 1 and 2 in mind because they're the ones that are playing. Also, hopefully at this point, you're familiar with this chord from playing it on the third line. So that's tied for 6 counts. Then you go down to the bottom line, G major for 6 counts. In the third measure, you have F for 3 counts, E major for 3 counts, and then you're going to end the song with that A and C right there with 2 and 1 on both measures. And that's pretty much it. So like I said, you can go through and play all those chords with the pedaling. Remember that it's exactly like the warm-up exercise we did on page 82. The only exception is on page 83. Those 2 quarter rests. Remember we had the E major chord on the first line and the fourth line. On that quarter rest, on beat 3, you'll actually lift your foot off the pedal altogether and then back down on the next measure. When you lift your foot, remember what I said earlier, don't take your foot completely off the pedal, just sort of rest it there, especially since it's only 1 count that you're resting for. Okay, so now before we look into the pedaling again, because I'm really just going to do the pedaling with both hands in a moment, but first I want to look at putting both hands together. So back at the beginning, let's look at our hand positions. You're really in what you could say is an A position if you wanted to, meaning your right hand, your thumb's on A, your left hand is on the A minor chord. Now, we said that the A in the right hand is on beat 3 by itself, but notice I outlined my right hand in sort of an A position. Well, you want to do your thumb on A, but if you look ahead, remember your second finger goes to C, your third finger D. So really, if you outline these first 5 notes with this hand position, you could be better off because you're already there and it doesn't sneak up on you. If you're here, already you're tempted to do the C with 3. But if you get in this position, even as far as that 5 on F sharp, now you don't have to, but if you can, you have an advantage. You're already outlined. You've already outlined the first 2 measures. Now in measure 3, you're already going to have to switch fingering, but at least that'll get you started. So again, the A is on beat 3. So you got your A first, and then both hands. And I'm still going to save my counting. I'm going to wait on that because there's not much to do in the left hand with counting. So I'm just working right now on getting the hands together. So there's my 2 on C, D, E. Remember, you're still tied in the left hand. Now in the next measure, go to the G chord in the left hand. You got your D in the right hand. Take as much time as you need to do that, by the way. This is going to be one of the more challenging parts putting the hands together. It's just where the chord changes are. So going on, you got 2 on B, next measure, G, A, B, a little bit of fingering in there, remember. Last measure, get ready to go to the F chord and C all at the same time. Then you've got the 2 back-to-back A's. You're still holding the F chord down at the top of page 83. So you got G sharp back to A. And in measure 2, get ready to go to that E chord and B in the right hand, followed by G sharp and E. Now, here's the part I was talking about earlier. You're going to lift your foot off the pedal when we get to pedaling in just a moment. You are actually going to move both hands to the right because you're going to an A. You're really going back to the beginning of the piece, if you think about it. You're not literally going back, but you're playing the same material. So this is where you were at. Remember this in the right hand, A minor chord. So you're here. You want your hands to go back to that beginning position. Now remember, don't hit the chord with the A in the right hand. It's just like the beginning. This A is on beat 3. It acts like a pickup. And then the next measure, both hands come together and the pedal will come in as well. Going on, it's just like the beginning, right? So all this is the same. Now here we have different notes in the right hand. So I'm on the second line, third measure. 3 on B, remember, squeeze the thumb to A. Now this is tricky in the next measure. I'm crossing 3 over to G sharp. This is cool though. When I go to the E major chord, I have 3 on G sharp. So your G sharps kind of coordinate in both hands. Going on, you've got 2 on F sharp, 3 on G sharp, and then remember the right hand settles to E and A, and the left hand moves slightly to A and C, and you're going to play all 4 of those notes again in the next measure. Now both hands are going to move to the right, so I always like to remember where I'm jumping to and how the hands are jumping and if they're jumping together, and in fact they are. But it's still tricky. Your 4th finger in the right hand goes up to the G, your left hand, it goes to the C chord. Now I did it one at a time. What you want to practice is being able to move both hands simultaneously and come down simultaneously. You'll never get a piece fully learned if you do this. That takes time. So you really got to practice jumping with both at the same time. That's going to take a little bit of time to master. But just work on coming from the end of the second line and going to the beginning of the third line. So going on, remember this is tied, the C chord. In the third measure, I'm going to the G chord and the D. This is the finger substitution. So I said beat 1, hit it with the thumb. Beat 2, move to the 3rd finger. Don't play it again. Continuing, 2 on B, and then the next measure, you're still tied in your left hand. And the last measure, we have the F chord in the left hand, C in the right hand. Move that 3rd finger to A. Next line. Second measure, 4th finger's on the B, move to the E chord, 2 on G sharp, thumb on E, and then both hands jump again during the rest, and then land together. Keep going, still tied in the left hand. Bottom line, here's our G chord with our D, substitute the 3 on beat 2, don't play. Then the 2nd finger on B, next measure. 3rd measure, F chord and C. Squeeze that thumb on the A. Next measure, remember the G sharps coordinate. 3 on G sharp in both hands. And then the last measure, left hand, A and C, right hand, E and A. And wait and do it all together. All right, so before I add the pedal in, let's look at the counting. And all the counting is really in the right hand, but I'm going to play the left hand with it because the left hand, you don't have to worry about counting. Here's why. The left hand is simply just doing holds. The only thing you really need to worry about the left hand is when to come in with your chord change, and we really just went through that. So what I look for when I'm playing my hands together is what notes do I play in the right hand where my left hand comes in on, or the change is on. And I line that up. Sometimes I maybe draw it with a pencil, an arrow, just as a reminder. but I'm not needing to count anything in the left hand. They're just really long holds. It's not necessary. So that being said, I'm going to start up here again. Remember we said beat 3, so a little count off is nice. We're going to do with the ands. So I'm going to adjust my fingering in the right hand. So we got 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and. There's your first measure of somewhat tricky rhythm. You've had it before, but remember dotted quarter note is 1.5 beats. So that's 1 and 2 followed by the F sharp on and. And it's only an and because it's just an eighth note, and then the E is 3 and. So again, that's 1 and 2 and 3 and. So from the beginning, it's 3 and 1 and 2 and 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 3 and. There's that same exact rhythm again. Different notes, but same rhythm. 1 and 2 and 3 and. So this is spread throughout the piece, as you'll see, but you definitely want to count. You don't want that rhythm to get lazy. You don't want 1, 2, 3, or even 1 and 2 and 3 and. You want 1 and 2 and 3 and. Again, don't be too quick on your eighth note. You don't want to go. So the eighth notes are quick, yes, but it's still a little relaxed. The counting will solve it. 1 and 2 and 3 and. And again, don't count 1 and 2 and 3 and. Believe it or not, I've seen that happen. So a nice even count. 1 and 2 and 3 and. So going on. 1 and 2 and 3 and 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 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 3 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 and. So you notice that those last four, or really measures 3 and 4 on the second line of page 83, are pretty tough. They were already challenging with this fingering. But when you add the rhythms, that requires that thumb squeezes in pretty quickly. 1 and 2 and 3 and. Likewise, you got this crossover, 1 and 2 and 3 and. So be ready for those notes and then be ready for this. So it's tricky. You certainly want to get your notes and fingering down first and then add this count in. If you're counting and you feel like, oh boy, I'm losing my notes, you might want to go back and review just notes and fingering without the count. Now, we finished here at the end of the second line. Now, I'll show you a little trick that'll help you go up into this next, the third line, but I'll get to that in a little bit. So you jump up and then 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and. See what I did there? That's our finger substitution. 1 and 2 and 3 and. Now you might be tempted to play it. That you got to work on. And maybe just do this many times. You could even do this exercise, going back and forth between my thumb and my third finger. So I get used to what that feels like, switching fingers without pressing the key again. All right, so going on. 1 and 2 and 3 and 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 1 and 2 and 3 and. Actually, it's 2, but there is a fermata, so you can hold that out. And you can see that, of course, a lot of that's just a repeat once you get to the end of the piece. Okay, so now let's get into the pedal. All right, so we're back up again with the pedal camera. Got my right foot here resting on the sustain damper pedal. And I said earlier in the lesson that you could already have your foot down if the pedal is playing on the very first note of the piece. However, it is not on this piece. You have this pickup note. So in the right hand, you've got this A, and they don't want that A to sustain into the next measure. So I'm going to rest my foot on top of the pedal, and I got my hands up here in the position ready to go, my right hand stretched out. I'm going to play the A by itself, and then all three come down together. So when I say all three, that's the left hand, the right hand, and the pedal. Now in this piece, every time you play something in the left hand, I take that back. There's one exception, two exceptions. But almost every single thing you play in the left hand, each time you play a different chord, you're going to pedal. Okay? Now, I'm not going to go through the counting this time. I'm just going to focus on the pedal. So in other words, coordinating pedal, left hand, right hand all together. So like I said, right hand first, then all three. So you're going to keep the pedal and your left hand down while your right hand continues. And hopefully at this point, you've pretty much got this rhythm down. So the third measure, remember, and you can exaggerate this. I'm going to exaggerate it. I'm going to lift my hands more than I should, but to show you that you're not going to lift your foot. And when I go down on these notes, the foot comes up and right back down. Okay, because what can happen is, you're going along, and watch this. See what I did? When I lifted my foot, when I lifted to go to the next chord. What it did is it broke the sound. And the whole point of pedaling is to not break the sound. It's to make everything smooth and connected. So we don't want our audience to even know we're pedaling, actually. Likewise, you have to pedal right there. Now, if I wait and pedal after the next chord, I've waited too long, it gets muddy and muddled, and that's where the music starts not to sound so clear anymore. So it's a fine tune. What am I trying to say? It's a fine. I can't even talk. You have to be very precise when you're doing this pedaling. So picking it up right there in the measure 3. Same thing here in the last measure. Hit the chord and the right hand, then pop off and right back down. Going on, second measure at the top of the page. Now here, lift both hands and your foot all at the same time. But when you come down, it's only the thumb and the right hand, and then the next measure, everything comes down. Be really careful about that. Going on, second line. So you can see it's the same idea again and again and again, where I'm down on the chord, lift the foot, right back down. And I messed up my fingering. You see, there's so much going on. So even when you have the pedal, that may happen, and you have to review this. So that's where I squeeze my thumb in, and then cross over, get ready for the pedal. Now here's the exception I was telling you about. These two measures, you don't have to pedal because it's the exact same notes, so it's not going to sound muddy. They actually have the pedal coming up completely. You see that? I didn't notice that earlier, which is cool. You're actually ending this first section of the piece and going to sort of like a chorus, and that's why there's those two lines at the end of the second line. They're not a double bar line, it's the end of a section. So it makes sense at the end of the section to have a little break in the sound. So you're going to lift everything and then come down on everything here. And that's going to sound really clean and clear. Now here we go. We're going to switch here with the pedal, right back down, and then do your finger substitution on beat 2. That's how quick the pedal goes up and down. Let's continue. Pedal here. Pedal here. Everything is off on beat 3, all together on beat 1. Bottom line, pedal, Switch the fingering in the right hand, then continue. Pedal. More pedaling here because the chord changes are more frequent. And then you can hold the pedal down for the last one. So it's tricky. You can learn everything else in this piece, and once you add that pedal, it's going to be tricky. That's not always going to be the case because, like I said in this lesson, once you learn this pedaling, that's pretty much the pedaling for piano. You actually have some lifts, you know, where you come completely off with during those rests, and at the end of that second line on page 83. That's actually not that common. So you're really actually learning quite a bit of pedaling just in this lesson. This is pretty much most of the pedaling you'll ever do. Now you may pedal more often because these chords don't change much, so that's trickier, that you have to do it more often, but it's still the exact same idea. Will the right hand ever influence pedaling? Yes, it will. If I'm playing this in the right hand and I'm holding down the pedal, you can hear that? It's already muddled. So if you have a very, very busy right hand or left hand usually you don't even pedal at that point because it gets so muddy. But if you have a very busy right hand and your left hand sitting on a chord, then yes, you'll have to pedal that too. But again, the concept of the up and down is pretty much the same. And don't worry about that. You won't get anything that complicated really anytime soon at all. So the last thing to do is just put it all together and play it for you. We talked about the dynamic. There's not much dynamically here. The first section of the piece, moderately soft, so pretty soft. When it gets to the chorus, the bigger section, moderately loud. And that's it. That's pretty much it. So it's pretty just much, you know, a very smooth, flowing, easygoing piece of music. So here we go. And I already messed up. Habit. I had the foot down, the pedal down on the A, but I still lifted. So, you know, if that works, you know, you could do it. I'm not going to encourage it. Let me, this should be a good lesson here. Line up everything. Don't start too soon. Think before you play. I'm still learning all these years later. All right, so here we go. All right, so that's probably a really good tempo for that piece. I've certainly heard it played faster. It can be. But, you know, I'm going to encourage you to go somewhat slow, even when you perform this piece, because there's just so much going on right now. I would say you might find yourself spending a lot of time on it, and obviously it takes even more time to play something fast. So accuracy is always. You have a lot of layers of this piece that you're putting together in this lesson. And, you know, there's that fingering and the finger substitution and all that in the right hand as well. All these chords. So it's just a very, very busy lesson. It's a great lesson because you're learning the pretty much way of pedaling from here on out. And that's wonderful. And, of course, Greensleeves is a very popular tune. It's also What Child Is This? So this could make a great Christmas piece, too. Same exact melody and tune. So take your time with this lesson. It's a very good lesson, one of the better arrangements in this book. I think this is a wonderful arrangement of Greensleeves, certainly recital-worthy piece if you're ever playing for other people in recitals and things. This is a great piece for that as well. All right, so I wish you all the best as always, and I look forward to seeing you in that next lesson.